Some mistakes cut deeper than others. Not the loud, reckless kind of mistakes, but the quiet ones. The ones you make with a smile on your face and a judgment tucked neatly behind your teeth. The kind of mistake that doesn't scream at the world, but whispers just loud enough for your soul to hear. Melissa Carter had made one of those mistakes. On the surface, Melissa was everything a woman in her late 30s might hope to be. At 38, she had carved out a life that looked just right. Blonde hair always brushed smooth, clothes that fit well and spoke of care. She lived in a polished suburb just outside of Nashville, where the houses stood tall and the streets stayed quiet. She drove a red BMW sports coupe, the kind of car that turned heads at stoplights. It wasn't just about speed or style for Melissa. That car was her badge of honor, a symbol that she had done things the right way, that she belonged. Melissa carried herself with a kind of confident pride, the kind that often walks hand in hand with judgment. She was brave, yes, never afraid to speak her mind. But somewhere along the way, that bravery had grown sharp edges. She had learned to read people quickly, or so she thought, often deciding who they were before they ever had a chance to show her otherwise. And so, when Darlene Washington moved into the neighborhood, Melissa barely gave her more than a passing glance. Darlene, at 52, was a large black woman, tall and broad, with thick dreadlocks tied back from her face like heavy ropes. She wore simple clothes, stretch pants, soft cotton shirts, old sneakers with the soles starting to wear thin. No makeup, no jewelry, no apologies. Darlene lived alone except for her 8-year-old son and a stout bulldog named Buddy, who followed her everywhere like a shadow. Every morning, Darlene could be seen outside her modest home, watering the lavender and rosemary that lined her walkway, her movements steady, unhurried. But what caught Melissa's eye, what truly caught her attention, wasn't the woman herself. It was the car. A black BMW sports coupe, same make, same model as Melissa's own prized possession. There it sat, right there in Darlene's driveway, gleaming under the Tennessee sun like it belonged. Melissa didn't say anything to Darlene directly, not at first, but the words found their way out during quiet morning chats with other neighbors. It's funny, isn't it? Some people just don't know what kind of car suits them. I mean, really, how does she even fit behind the wheel of that thing? It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel, at least not in the obvious sense. It was the kind of comment people pass around like sugar packets, sweet on the outside, toxic at the core. Melissa thought she was just being honest. After all, wasn't she the type who spoke her mind? Called things like she saw them. But what she didn't see, what she refused to see, was the harm those words could do. The sting of being looked at but never truly seen. Darlene noticed. Of course she did. You always notice when someone decides you're less than, when their eyes slide right past you as if you are invisible, when their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. Still, Darlene kept her grace. She watered her plants. She walked her dog. She held her head high. Melissa, meanwhile, polished her red BMW, proud of the reflection it gave back to her, proud of the life she'd built. Certain she understood the measure of people. But the thing about judgment is that it's blind to the truth. And the truth about Darlene Washington was a story Melissa Carter was nowhere near ready to hear. Not yet. It started the way these things often do, small enough to brush off. The first time, Darlene Washington had been trying to back her car out of the driveway on a warm Saturday morning. She had her son in the back seat, the bulldog Buddy sitting up front like he owned the place. But maneuvering the BMW was tricky because Melissa Carter's red coupe was parked just a little too close to the edge of Darlene's driveway. Not technically blocking it, not enough to call it out, but close enough to make the simple act of leaving home feel like squeezing through a door that wasn't meant for you. Melissa was sitting on her porch at the time, sipping coffee, watching it all happen. She didn't move. She didn't offer to help. She watched Darlene reverse, inch forward, reverse again, twisting the steering wheel back and forth in a slow, careful dance, her jaw set, eyes straight ahead. Melissa didn't say a word, but deep down, there was a certain satisfaction watching Darlene struggle. She told herself it was no big deal. After all, the car wasn't technically in the way. If Darlene wanted to make things easier on herself, maybe she should be driving something more sensible for her size. She smiled into her coffee, feeling a little smug, and let it go. But things didn't stay small for long. It happened again the following Tuesday. And the next weekend after that. Each time Melissa's car just a little too close. Each time Darlene quietly working around the obstacle like she'd learned to work around people her whole life. Then came the morning that changed everything. The air was heavy, thick with the Tennessee summer heat. The sky hung low, threatening rain. Melissa was on her front porch again, coffee in hand, scrolling her phone, half listening to the chirp of the cicadas. That's when she saw Darlene. But this time, something was different. Darlene wasn't moving slow. She wasn't watering her plants. She was rushing out of her front door, panic written all over her face, her son limp in her arms. The boy's head drooped awkwardly against her shoulder, his small chest barely moving. Melissa sat up, lowering her phone. She watched as Darlene fumbled with the car door, trying to get her son buckled into the back seat, her hands shaking so badly she could barely clip the latch. The boy's skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue. He wasn't crying, and that was the worst part. Darlene slammed the door shut and turned toward Melissa's house, running up the short walkway, out of breath, eyes wide with fear. "Please, I'm sorry. Can you move your car? I need to get my boy to the hospital. He's not breathing right. Please." Melissa stood. She glanced at her BMW parked right where it always was, too close, edging into Darlene's driveway just enough to make a quick exit impossible. She could have moved then. She could have grabbed her keys and helped. But instead she crossed her arms and said, "Too cool, too calm. Maybe if you had a car that was more practical for your situation, you wouldn't be having this problem." The words dropped like stones between them. Darlene's mouth opened slightly, like the air had been knocked out of her. She held her son tighter. "Please," she whispered, "just move your car." Melissa stared for a moment longer. Maybe she wanted Darlene to beg. Maybe she wanted to prove a point. Finally, with a loud sigh meant to say, "I'm the reasonable one here," she grabbed her keys, walked slowly to her car, and pulled forward just enough for Darlene to squeeze through. Darlene didn't say thank you. She didn't look back. She just got into her car and drove like her whole world was burning. Melissa stood there on her porch, watching the black BMW disappear down the street. She took another sip of her coffee, but the taste had gone bitter. In the pit of her stomach, something started to twist. Not guilt exactly, not yet, but discomfort, a flicker of doubt. Still, by afternoon, the story she told herself had returned. She could have handled that better. She's always in a rush, always so dramatic. The words slid easily into the conversation with the other ladies on the block. Nods of agreement, soft chuckles. "And that car?" Melissa added with a smile. "She really thinks that car suits her?" The laughter was polite, easy, but the damage had been done. And the worst part? Melissa still believed she was in the right, at least for now. The trouble with judgment is that it makes you blind, not just to the person standing in front of you, but to the story you never bothered to hear. For Melissa Carter, it was easier to believe she had simply spoken the truth. Easier to think of Darlene Washington as the problem, not herself. After all, she had only pointed out what everyone was thinking, hadn't she? Days passed. Melissa went on with her routine. Coffee on the porch, a quick scroll through the neighborhood Facebook group, a dinner party here, a chat with the ladies there. If anyone brought up what happened that morning, the rush to the hospital, the panic on Darlene's face, it was with a roll of the eyes and a shake of the head. "It was probably nothing serious," someone said. "She always acts like the sky is falling." Melissa nodded along. She didn't ask questions. She didn't check in. Why would she? But then came the neighborhood gathering the following week, a welcome event for new families and a chance to catch up after the long summer. Melissa arrived on time, wearing her favorite white blouse and pearl earrings, the picture of suburban grace. The backyard was buzzing with soft conversation, glasses clinking, the smell of barbecue in the air. Halfway through the evening, the HOA president stood near the patio table, tapping a spoon against a glass to call for attention. "Before we wrap up tonight," he began, "I want to take a moment to recognize one of our own. Some of you may not know this, but a few years back, one of the worst highway accidents we've seen in this county happened on Route 64. A multi-car pileup with several drivers trapped and critically injured. The crowd quieted. Melissa sipped her wine, only half listening. There was one person who pulled over that day," the president continued. "One person who stayed calm, took charge, and started giving aid before the ambulances could even arrive. That person saved a life that afternoon. The paramedics said if it hadn't been for her, at least one of those victims wouldn't have made it to the hospital alive." He paused, lifting his glass. "That person was Darlene Washington." Melissa froze. The name hit like ice water down her spine. Around her, there was a gentle wave of applause. A few neighbors turned, looking toward the back of the yard where Darlene stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, head slightly bowed. Melissa stared. The president went on. "And for some of us, this story is personal. One of the men trapped in that crash was my cousin. Thanks to Darlene's quick thinking, he got the chance to walk his daughter down the aisle last spring. And I know there are others here tonight who were touched by that moment, whether they realized it or not." Melissa's glass hovered midair, her hand trembling just enough to make the ice clink against the rim. She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. She looked at Darlene, really looked, for the first time. Not at her clothes, not at her size, not at the car parked outside her house. At her. There stood the woman Melissa had so easily dismissed. The woman she had whispered about behind closed doors, smirked at over coffee. The woman she had treated as invisible. And yet it was Darlene who had been the hero. Not loud, not flashy, just steady hands and clear thinking when it mattered most. Melissa felt the sting of shame bloom hot across her chest. She set her glass down, fingers fumbling at the stem, her mind racing. All the things she had assumed, all the things she had said. She wanted to slip away, to vanish into the crowd. But the words from the president's speech echoed too loudly in her head. She couldn't unhear them. She couldn't unsee the truth standing right there in front of her. Melissa had been wrong, and now she knew it. The thing about shame is that it doesn't shout. It creeps in, slow and steady, curling up behind your ribs, making it hard to breathe. It lingers in your throat like a word you can't quite swallow. For Melissa Carter, that shame had a name, and her name was Darlene Washington. After the night of the neighborhood gathering, after the speech, after the applause, after the truth dropped on her like a weight she could no longer ignore, Melissa couldn't stop replaying the words in her head. The person who saved a life that afternoon was Darlene Washington. Melissa lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, hearing those words over and over again. Each time they landed harder. She thought about the looks she had given Darlene, the tight little smiles, the whispered comments about her body, the jabs about her car. All those times she had chosen to see Darlene as less. And all the while, Darlene had carried herself with quiet dignity, never snapping back, never lowering herself to the level Melissa had so easily sunk to. Melissa had been so sure of herself, so comfortable in her judgment. But now, that comfort was gone. The next morning, Melissa stood by her kitchen window, watching as Darlene walked her son down the sidewalk, the bulldog Buddy waddling along beside them. The boy's hand was tucked safely in his mother's, his small backpack bouncing with each step. Melissa's chest ached. She reached for her coffee, but the taste had turned bitter. She set the mug down and pressed her fingers against the cool granite countertop, staring hard at the scene outside her window. She knew what she had to do, but knowing and doing aren't always the same. It took her 3 more days to build the courage. When Melissa finally walked up to Darlene's porch, her palms were sweating. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her ears. She had rehearsed the words a dozen times, maybe more, but they felt clumsy and thin as air the moment she reached Darlene's front steps. Darlene was outside, trimming the lavender plants along the walkway. Buddy sprawled out nearby, panting softly in the heat. Melissa cleared her throat. Darlene, she began, her voice cracking at the edges. Darlene stood up slowly, turning to face her. She wiped her hands on the sides of her pants, her expression calm, but guarded. Melissa swallowed hard. I need to say something, and I need you to hear me. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that fills a space so heavy it almost hums. I was wrong, Melissa said. I've been wrong about you from the beginning, about a lot of things. Darlene didn't speak. She didn't nod. She just waited. I judged you, Melissa continued, eyes beginning to sting. I judged you by the way you look, by the car you drive. I made comments, ugly, small comments, and I told myself they didn't mean much. But they did. They meant everything. Melissa's hands gripped the strap of her purse so tight her knuckles turned white. The truth is, she whispered, I didn't just disrespect you. I disrespected myself, because I know better. I was raised better. Her throat tightened, her voice breaking despite every effort to keep it steady. You saved a life, she said softly. You saved my husband's life. And I didn't even have the decency to see you, to really see you. Darlene held Melissa's gaze for a long moment, and then slowly she spoke. It's not the first time someone's looked right past me. The words weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were simply true. But it never stops hurting, Darlene added, her voice low but sure. Melissa nodded, her eyes full of tears now, blinking hard to keep them from falling. I'm sorry, she said. I am truly, deeply sorry. For the first time since Melissa had stepped onto that porch, Darlene's expression softened just a little. She exhaled slowly, nodding once. I appreciate you saying that, Darlene replied. It takes something real to show up and admit it. Melissa's shoulders sagged under the weight she'd been carrying, but in the space between them now stood something honest. Not a perfect fix, not a magic eraser, but a beginning. As Melissa turned to leave, Buddy lifted his head, gave one small wag of his tail. Melissa smiled through the sting in her eyes. Sometimes dignity isn't loud. Sometimes grace is the quiet that follows after the storm. And sometimes the hardest thing a person can do is simply show up and mean it. Sometimes the hardest thing about learning a lesson is that you don't get to learn it in private. For Melissa Carter, the truth about herself had unfolded right there in her own neighborhood, on the same sidewalks where she walked her dog, the same porches where she sipped coffee and shared polite conversation, the place where her judgment had lived so comfortably, unchecked, for far too long. But here's the thing about the truth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Melissa could have chosen to stay silent after that apology on Darlene Washington's porch. She could have told herself that showing up, saying sorry was enough, but something inside her knew better. The following Sunday, Melissa found herself standing once again on Darlene's walkway. This time she wasn't alone. She had brought a small gift, a potted rosemary plant tied with a simple blue ribbon. It's not much, she told Darlene, but I thought maybe it could sit with the lavender. Darlene accepted the plant with a nod, her eyes soft but still cautious. Thank you, she said. There was no grand forgiveness, no sweeping gesture of friendship, but between them now stood something real, the slow, quiet beginning of respect. Melissa didn't expect to be welcomed into Darlene's circle overnight. She didn't expect to become best friends or erase the words she'd spoken. She knew better than that, but she kept showing up, in small ways. When Darlene's son had a school fundraiser, Melissa was there, buying cookies and raffle tickets. When Buddy went missing for an afternoon, Melissa helped search the neighborhood, calling out his name until they found him curled up beneath a neighbor's porch. These weren't acts of charity. They weren't about clearing Melissa's conscience. They were about choosing, every day, to be better than she had been the day before. Months passed. The seasons turned. The red BMW and the black BMW still sat parked on the same street side by side. But the space between their owners had changed. It wasn't just Melissa who noticed. Neighbors who had once joined in the snickering started waving to Darlene when they passed. Conversations grew a little warmer, a little more human, and one afternoon as Melissa stood in line at the local grocery store, she overheard two women talking by the flower stand. You know that woman down on Maple? The one with the black BMW? Yeah, Darlene. She saved someone's life once. Did you know that? Melissa smiled softly to herself. The story was out there now, and not the story Melissa had once believed. Not the one about how Darlene didn't fit the part. The true story. The one about courage, about grace, about what really makes a person worth respecting. The lesson Melissa learned wasn't written down anywhere. It didn't come from a self-help book or a sermon. It came the hard way, through her own missteps, through the quiet dignity of the woman she had once looked down on. And here's what she learned, something she now carried with her like a stone in her pocket. Respect is not something you give based on appearance. It's not about size or skin or the shine on someone's shoes. It's about how people move through the world, how they show up, how they hold steady when the world tries to push them aside. Melissa learned that being loud doesn't make you strong, that being right doesn't make you good, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop talking long enough to listen. If there's one thing this story can offer, maybe it's this. Take a moment. Think about the people in your life, the ones you pass by without really seeing, the neighbor with the loud music, the woman at the checkout line, the man who doesn't dress the way you think he should. Ask yourself, have I decided who they are without ever hearing their story? Because judgment is easy, but understanding? Understanding takes work. It takes patience. It takes humility. And sometimes it takes the courage to admit you were wrong. So here's my invitation to you, wherever you are listening to this story. The next time you feel yourself slipping into that easy place, the place where judgment comes faster than kindness, pause, breathe, look again, ask the question, what don't I know about this person? You might be surprised at the answer. And if this story moved you, share it. Tell someone. Let it be a small reminder that respect isn't given to the loudest voice or the prettiest face. It belongs to all of us, earned not by how we look, but by how we live. Because every time we choose understanding over judgment, we make the world just a little bit kinder. One choice, one neighbor, one story at a time.